Hello, and welcome to this lecture on APA citation. In this lecture, I'm going to be going through the quality of the sources that you should be using, the reference list, and how to do in-text citation. Let's start with source quality. When we think about the quality of our sources, we have two distinct groups: academic and non-academic. Academic are generally considered to be better than non-academic sources. And even within the academic sources, there are higher quality and lower quality sources. The first group would be the peer-reviewed journal articles. There are many different academic journals that are peer-reviewed. Here are just a few. The next group of papers are those that are written by academics but have not yet been peer-reviewed. Working papers are papers that academics are currently working on. They hope to get them published. However, it sometimes takes years to get a paper published. Here are two common working paper sites that you might run into: the Social Science Research Network and the National Bureau of Economic Research, also known as NBER. We also have seminar or conference notes. Oftentimes, academics are invited to conferences and they are there to present their latest work, which may not yet be published. And then textbooks. Now, these are often edited by peers, however, they're not necessarily peer-reviewed. A thesis from a PhD or a master's project. These papers have been reviewed by a supervisor. However, they have not been peer-reviewed by other professionals in the field. And then we have article commentaries, non-governmental documents, and the professor's lecture notes. So again, these are the types of papers that are written by academics, but they do not go through the peer review process. Everything in the academic section is reasonably good. However, you always would like to strive for the top, the peer-reviewed journal article. And then we can move to the non-academic group. Professional magazines like The Economist or Canadian Business. These are written by non-academics, and they're not always the best source of information. Similarly, documentary films, newspapers, and magazines. In many cases, the amount of research that is done is reasonable. However, it cannot be fully trusted. Many of these sources have a bias built in. That is, they are trying to promote something. It could be political bias, or it could be bias towards sponsors. In magazines, you may have advertisers that influence the types of stories that are written. In newspapers, you have political biases, so you may have heard of left-leaning and right-leaning news sources. Documentary films are often trying to change your perception or your view of certain events. And even professional magazines might have a bias towards a certain direction. And lastly, we have the corporate websites, blogs, and forum posts. These are the types of sources where you need to be very cautious about the types of information you're gathering. Let's move on to the reference list. In an APA reference list, there is going to be a standard format to the reference. It will follow in order these questions. Who wrote the paper? When was the paper written? What is the title of the paper? And where can it be found? Here we have 5 common reference types that you will encounter when writing a paper. Periodicals, which come out in different periods. Journal articles, magazines, and newspapers will follow this format. Books. And there is some variation within books. Some books are edited. Sometimes you're citing a chapter within a book. So there are a few different formats for books. This is your most basic type of book, one in which the entire book is written by an author or authors. Sometimes you may have a book which is a compilation. In that case, I recommend that you go online and look for the proper way to reference that particular type of book. Working papers. Again, in economics, you will find the Social Science Research Network, SSRN, or the National Bureau of Economic Research, NBER, as 2 common places where you will find working papers. Government or other organization reports. And then web pages. Now within these groups there might be some slight variation. However, most of your sources will follow one of these 5 basic reference types. The first thing that we're going to look at is who wrote the book. And usually this is an author. However, it could also be an organization name. When was the article or book written? Sometimes the date is going to be just the year. Other times it will be the year and the month. And other times it will be the year, month, and date. What is the title of the article? And where can I find this particular article? So here are some specific examples. If you would like, you can pause the video and take a look at the details. Here we have a periodical. Here is a book, a working paper, a government or NGO report, and a web page. In most cases, there will be one work, and it will be written in sentence case and italic. We can see examples of this within this list of references that we have here. Notice the title that we have for this particular report. It is in sentence case, which means that everything is written as if it were in a sentence. Notice the lowercase r in report, the lowercase I in impact, the lowercase a in achievement, and so on. This is sentence case. Also notice that it is written in italic. We see another example. Again, italic sentence case. In other cases, we may see a minor work and a major work. When there is a minor work and a major work, the minor work is written in sentence case and plain text, and the major work is written in title case and italic. When do we see this? We'll see this when we have periodicals, and we'll see this when we have chapters in books, each chapter written by a different person. Let's take a look at our list and see where we see this. Notice that our minor work, which is Vouchers for Private Schooling in Colombia, Evidence from a Randomized Natural Experiment, is in sentence case and plain text. And this was written in the American Economic Review, a journal. We also see this when we have a chapter within a book. Do high school exit exams influence educational attainment or labor market performance? Plain text, sentence case. And then notice our major work, which is Standards-Based Reform and Children in Poverty, Lessons for No Child Left Behind. And this is written in italic title case. Also notice that there is a slight variation in how this reference is done, right? In A. Gamaran, editor. So again, sometimes you find references that do not follow a standard format, and there is a slight variation. This is actually why I put this one into this list. If the author is unknown, you are going to move everything to the left. However, you are always going to pin the date in the second position. Let me show you what I mean by this. Here we see the title of the work, Luck and Coffee, Scandal Hit Chain Rated by Regulators in China. Notice that the title of this particular article has been moved to the left. In this particular case, that is the minor work. You can see that BBC is still in italic, and that is the major work. So we're only moving one item to the left. The next one, 10 steps from seed to cup. Notice that here we are moving the major work to the left because there is no minor work. But again, only one item is being moved to the left of the date. And then we have the same thing with the next reference. What is dry process coffee? Notice that in all of these cases, the date is pinned in the second spot. We see our second and third references in this list have no date associated with them. That's why we have ND. The reference list is organized alphabetically. Notice as we move down through this reference list, we are moving in a alphabetical fashion. Addy, Duras, Sampler, 10. Notice how the number actually starts with a T. So when you have a number, you actually put it in order as if the number was written out. 10 starts with a T, therefore it's going to be after S, but before U. And notice that our last reference here, we actually have an organization as the author, USAID. When we're writing our dates, they must be appropriate for the article. Sometimes you'll require just the year. This is often the case with books. It is also the case with journal articles. Sometimes you'll actually see a very specific date for a journal article, giving the month and the specific date. However, that is not required. For journal articles in periodicals, we need to only include the year. For something like a magazine, the year and the month would be appropriate, since magazines come out on a monthly basis. And for a newspaper article, you're going to want to put in the year, month, and date, because newspapers come out on a daily basis. On occasion, you may not be able to find the date that the article is written. In that case, as we've seen before, you just put in N period D period for no date. And here we can see some of those dates. Next item to look at is going to be in-text citation. In-text citations require the author's last name and the year. Regardless of what is written in the reference list, i.e. year, month, date, you only need the year when you bring it to the in-text citation. Here is a table which outlines how you are going to include your authors within the reference list and also within the in-text citations. When there is one author, you must of course include that one author in both the reference list and the in-text citation. You can see that we need the initials of the author within the actual reference list. When we move things to in-text, we simply need the last name. And of course, we see that both require the year. Moving to two authors, we want to include both of the authors again within the reference list and within the in-text citation. Notice that there is no comma before the ampersand in the in-text citation. So Paul and Chen with no comma before the ampersand. When we move to three or more authors, we need to include all of the authors in the reference list, but when we have the in-text citation, we can simply use the first author and then et al. I want you to pay attention to the phrase et al. Notice that et does not have a period after it. It means and. It is a full word, whereas al is an abbreviation, which is why we have the period after al. Now, what happens if we have the same lead author for two citations? How do we translate this into the in-text citation? For example, we see here that I've got Paul et al., and then below that I've got Paul et al. Well, in this case, it's easy to differentiate because we have 2012 versus 2016. So in this particular case, it is the year which is differentiating these two citations. Imagine if we had two citations with the same lead author that were published in the same year. Here we have an example of that. In the reference list, we have Paul, Chen, and Dalton. And we also have Paul, Ruiz, Dalton, and Cross. Both of these citations are from 2015. So how do we differentiate these two citations? From what we just learned, both can be listed as Paul et al. 2015. However, we need to distinguish these. So how you do this is you add enough names after the lead author in order to distinguish the two articles. So our first one is going to be Paul, Chen, and Dalton, 2015 for the in-text citation. And my second one is going to be Paul Ruiz et al. Notice that I am not going to use et al. For and Dalton. This is because et al. Means and others. Dalton is only a single individual, so using et al. Does not make sense. However, for the second citation, Paul Ruiz et al., that makes sense because Dalton and Cross are others. Let's get back to our list and look at what happens when we have 21 or more authors. The maximum number of authors that you are ever going to list in the reference list is 20. Meaning that if you have 20 authors, then you are going to list all 20. However, if you have 21 authors, you are going to list the first 19 and the 21st. If you have 22 authors, you are going to list the first 19 and the 22nd. If you had 50 authors, you're going to list the first 19 and the 50th. In between the 19th and the last author, you're going to put in an ellipsis. So how can I use citation in APA style? This can be done using the common method, where you include the author and date in parentheses at the end of a paraphrase. Or you may include a signal phrase. The signal phrase is part of the sentence, and it may include the author, the date, or both. Here is the common in-text citation. A paraphrase has been written down, and you simply follow it up with the citation in parentheses. Sometimes, however, you might want to include the information of the citation within the actual sentence. For example, we have Paul and Chen explained some paraphrase. In this case, you don't need to actually recite Paul and Chen at the end, because Paul and Chen are already being signaled as the originators of this idea. So what we're going to do, since it has already been signaled, we're going to add the date in parentheses immediately following the names. And here we have our second example, in which case the year as well as the authors have been included in the signal phrase. In 2009, Paul and Chen explained some paraphrase. This is a valid way to cite. You do not need to include the authors and year at the end of this particular paraphrase because you have signaled both already. What about bringing titles into the main body of a paper? When you bring titles into the main body of the paper, you always have them in title case. The other trick is to keep the font style the same. That is, keep italic titles italic and keep plain text titles in plain text. However, you need to put quotes around those plain text titles. This is how you're going to be able to separate the title from the rest of the text. Let's take a look at a couple examples. Let's imagine that I want to bring ability bias, discount rate bias, and the return to education into my main body. If I'm going to do this, I notice that in my reference list, this title is in italic. Bringing it into the main body, I am going to keep it in italic, but I am going to convert that sentence case title into a title case title. Notice bias has gone from a lowercase b to an uppercase b, discount lowercase d to an uppercase d, and so on. In the second one, notice that I have a minor work that I want to bring into the main body of the article. Since the title is in plain text, I need to separate it from the rest of the main body. I do this by putting quotation marks around this title. But notice again, I am converting this sentence case title into a title case title when I bring it into the main body. So let's review what we learned in this lecture. First, source quality. Academic, peer-reviewed papers are the best sources that you can use. The reference list. Who, when, what, and where. This is the order in which we put things when we are writing out our reference. And the other thing to notice is that there is always going to be a title, which is in sentence case, and there is always going to be a title, which is in italics. Look back and check that out. You will notice that there is always something in sentence case, and there is always something in italics. When there's only one work, it is sentence case and italic. When there are two works, a minor and a major work, you have a sentence case title and is followed by an italic title case title. And last, in-text citations. In-text citations include the last name only and the year only. And also recall, et al. Means and others. I'd like to thank the photographer for uploading this photo onto unsplash.com. Thank you for listening to this lecture. I hope that you've learned something. Take care, everybody.